Hello. Is anybody here? I don't know yet. It's 8 p.m. I have my wine handy. I hope people are showing up. I know a lot of people were RSVP'd that they were coming. So I'm just going to give it a couple minutes here because I'm not quite sure. This is the second live I've done. The first one was kind of a disaster because a lot of people didn't know that they actually had to belong to Breathless Bubbles and Books, which was the host of the first event. So I'm hoping people got the message and, oh, good. All right, somebody's here. Joanne is here. I think in these early moments when nobody else is here yet, I'm going to bring in my, hello, come here, Dexter, step up. I'm going to bring in my African gray parrot to say hello because he he is the person, not the person, he's my companion when I write a lot of my books, and he loves these things and just wanted to join in. So say hello, Dexter. Hi, Joanne. And I'm sure some other people will be here momentarily because I know that a lot of people are RSVP'd, or a few anyway. So I'll give it a couple minutes. Joanne, hi. Let's have a wine sip, shall we? Oh, hi, Betty. All right, I'm just going to give it a couple minutes and let people come on in. Ian, I think Ian McDowell is here. Ian, if you're here, say hello. There you go. Hi, Ian. Dexter says hello back. Hold on, I'll let him down for a minute to say hi. Hold on. Dexter, step down, buddy. Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Somebody let me know if you guys can hear me so I can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. Oh, good. Okay. So Betty says yes. I'm glad you can hear me. I'll give it a couple more minutes. I know a couple other people wanted to show up. Hopefully they are not in a COVID stupor of their own, having drunk a lot of wine. I just finished actually a virtual wine tasting class with this company called NYC Wine. They did a lot of events before the pandemic at their space, which was really cool. And now they're doing them all virtually. And Dexter here is a big fan of the first responders. He is a very vocal supporter every night at 7 p.m. If you haven't seen it, I have a video of him on my Facebook page of him cheering for first responders. So hi, Dexter. And I'm sure he will join us later on, but he's going over onto his chair for now. Oh, John is here. Hi, John. My buddy, John. I'll tell you a funny story about how John and I met. John is a very careful reader, and he read my book and he was like, love the book, but can you tell me really what the 1920, the make of the car that Remus gave away at his 1921 New Year's Eve party? What was the make of it? He said, because Pontiacs were certainly not invented by 1922. And I had gotten that reference from the Delhi Historical Society, and it turns out it was incorrect. So I had corrected it for future versions. And somebody came to a recent reading and said that their ancestor had been at Remus's 1921 New Year's Eve party and had received a car, and that person disappeared before I could actually find out the make of the car. So we will talk more about Remus's 1921 New Year's Eve party. So anyway, I'm just going to get started. People can jump in and keep asking questions, just jump in. I'm going to do something different this time where I'm going to basically do the slideshow presentation that I do whenever I do an event. I should be on paperback tour right now doing these events, but obviously nobody's traveling anywhere, and I'm in New York City and certainly not traveling anywhere. So coming to you from the kitchen of my home on the Upper West Side, talking to you about my book, The Ghost of Eden Park. Can you guys see the, I'm trying to do a show and tell. Can you see the pictures let me know if I should raise, lower, because I have a bunch of show and tell pictures to share with you today. Let me know if this is the right height, if I should put it before, after, whatever. Can you see the photos? Okay. So I usually get my ideas from archives, libraries, out of print books. But the idea for the Ghost of Eden Park actually came from television, specifically the show Boardwalk Empire. Did anybody watch Boardwalk Empire on HBO? It ran about in the aughts, in the 2000s, for about 5 years. It was a fantastic show. It really brilliantly captured the dawn of the 1920s. Nobody had yet heard of Al Capone. Bootleggers were still trying to figure out how to circumvent prohibition laws. There was a minor character named George Remus. Here's George Remus. There's a little glare, I'm sorry. But George Remus was a fascinating character. He spoke of himself in the third person. As you can see in this photo, he is in his Cincinnati mansion getting a massage. Brilliantly played by the actor Glenn Flesher, by the way, who really resembles the real George Remus. And here he is on a telephone call with Steve Buscemi's character Nucky Thompson, just to give you a little bit of context for the scene here. And they're wheeling and dealing. They're in a business deal. Things are getting a bit heated. And Remus says to Steve Buscemi, "Remus finds you petty and resentful." And Steve Buscemi answers, "Well, Remus can go fuck himself." And I thought it was hilarious. There were a lot of these sort of Abbott and Costello moments with Remus because he spoke of himself in the third person. And I wondered if George Remus had actually been a real character in history. It turns out that he was. And his real life was so much more interesting and fascinating than anything portrayed on Boardwalk Empire. And I immediately knew that he would make a really fantastic book for a subject for nonfiction. His story really epitomized the 1920s. So before I really get into George Remus, I want to talk for a minute about researching George Remus. And here, if you can see it, is a overhead scanner at Yale University Law Library. As soon as I found out that there was a 5,500-page transcript at Yale University Law Library, I hightailed it up there. And I booked, by the way, just an aside, it was Parents' Weekend at Yale. All of the good hotels were taken. And I ended up staying in this rickety old hotel where I was sure I was going to be murdered. It was historic. I mean, there was rumored to be haunted. There was a shared bathroom down the hall. It was terrifying. But anyway, it was worth it because I got to sit in the law library for a week and Xerox every single page of this trial transcript. There were about 8 volumes that were this thick. And I Xeroxed every single page from like morning, opening to closing in the library. And this transcript had the most fascinating details. My favorite of which was that George Remus did not wear underwear. And apparently in the 1920s, this was a cause for great alarm. It was apparently the sign for an unsound mind. And I found really incredible details in there, more details than you ever normally get for a nonfiction. And it was the details in this trial transcript that really let me structure the book as a whodunit. I wanted it to be a real life nonfiction whodunit. You don't know who's the murderer, who's going to get killed. It goes back and forth. And for the research geeks in the room, I have to say that this was the sexiest goddamn scanner I have ever seen. You just sat there. There was no rustling with the book. You didn't have to move it around. It just Xeroxed everything from overhead like this gorgeous sunbed of knowledge. Highly recommend that every library out there gets an overhead scanner. So here is George Remus. How do you solve a problem like George Remus? Can you guys see him okay? Let me know if you can see the pictures. If you have any questions, just jump in. George Remus had quite a difficult childhood. He immigrated from Germany when he was a little kid. His father was a mean and abusive alcoholic, and George Remus had to quit school and work for the family. And he quickly rose through the ranks. He worked at his uncle's pharmacy. He became a law student. He sort of studied at night. He became one of the most successful Chicago defense attorneys. And he gained quite a reputation. He would attack opposing counsel. He would leap across the courtroom. He would pull out his hair. He would scream and curse. But he was a very successful Chicago defense attorney. But that wasn't enough for him. In 1920, he began getting clients that were guilty of violating prohibition laws. And Remus was amazed with the ease with which these clients paid their fines and moved on. He decided he was much smarter than any of these men. And using his pharmaceutical background and his legal background, he scoured the Volstead Act for a loophole, and he found it. With a physician's prescription, it was legal to buy, manufacture, sell, and distribute alcohol, quote unquote, for medicinal purposes. And so this was something that he latched onto, and he devised a scheme to become the preeminent bootlegger in American history, which he very quickly became in short order. So George Remus, this was a big part of his plan. This is Imogene Holmes. Can you guys see the pictures now? Can you see it? Can you guys see the pictures? Let me know if you can see the pictures. Okay. So this is Imogene Remus. She was a big part of George Remus's plan in terms of becoming the preeminent bootlegger in American history. They met when she was a dust girl in Chicago's Remus's Chicago law office. She was a single mother. She was getting a divorce from her own husband. And she latched on to Remus, knowing that this guy was going places. He left his own wife. They began a steamy affair. And you could tell that Imogene Remus very quickly settled into her role as the bootlegger's wife. Look at this picture of her. She has a very smug smile on her face, if you can see it. On her hand that's displayed there, there's a huge honking diamond ring. Not sure if you can really see that, but it's very carefully positioned to catch the light, this diamond ring. And she's very satisfied with herself. And she knows that George Remus is her ticket to a better life. They had a very interesting relationship. George Remus really respected Imogene. He called her his prime minister. He confided in her about all of his bootleg plans and really respected her opinion on what he was going to do. But Imogene Remus only had one nickname for George, and her nickname for George was Daddy, which I think really tells a lot of, says a lot about the relationship. And before they got married, she confided to a friend that she was going to, quote, "Laurel Remus for his role." So that also says a little bit about Imogene and her intentions with George Remus. So they moved to Cincinnati in 1919, and Cincinnati, by the way, was a very strategic place for people to for the booze business, for Prohibition. It was within a 300-mile radius of all the pre-Prohibition whiskey that was stored in the warehouses. So there's very strategic location. And they bought this mansion. This is in Price Hill, which was the very most wealthiest and most prestigious neighborhood of Cincinnati. And they decided to do extensive renovations. The renovations ended up being about $12 million in today's money. Before Remus married Imogene, he decided to put the deed for this home into her name. He gave it to her. It was a wedding gift, and it was one of the many decisions that he would come to regret. So here is a picture of Death Valley Farm, which is a very important location in Remus's business. He was frequently attacked by whiskey pirates. Now, when you ask what whiskey pirates are, they aren't pirates of the Ahoy Matey variety. They were actually roving bands of thieves who would descend upon bootleggers' premises. They would cut the wires, they would bound and gag the watchman, and they would steal every barrel in sight. So Remus was the victim of this a couple times, and he decided that he needed a very secure location. This was Death Valley Farm. It was sort of west of the Cincinnati proper, and this is where he went. Rum runners from all over the way, all across the country would come to Death Valley and buy Remus's booze. He treated them as valued guests. They would come and they would get a free alcohol, a hot meal, a cot to sleep on. He even had craps games where he would extend lines of credit to his most favorite bootleggers. They could pay the next time. And it was named Death Valley because it was very good at keeping out whiskey pirates. It was named Death Valley in honor of the pirates who tried to trespass and were never heard from again. Not so great at keeping out prohibition agents, which Remus would soon come to learn. So here was one of my favorite finds from the archives. I know the print is pretty small here, but what this is an authentic menu from a Chicago speakeasy circa about 1924. And I love this find. You really see what kinds of cocktails that were on offer at the speakeasies. All of the bootleggers who went to Remus's and the rum runners who went to Remus's Death Valley would go back to their cities and sell them in these speakeasies. And just to give you a couple names of the drinks that were on hand back in the 1920s, there was a Dirty Dick's Flip. There was a Dirty Dick Special. There was a Maiden's Prayer, I guess if you had too much Dirty Dick. And my personal favorite was the Corpse Reviver, which, as you might surmise from the name, was actually a cure for a hangover, the Corpse Reviver. You know, you were pretty much dead, you drank this whiskey, and you were back on your feet again. It was sort of bite the hair of the dog that bit you. So I love this find, especially for the prices, too. There was a champagne cocktail on here that was 75 cents. I don't think we will ever see that again. Even with the Great Depression that we're going to face now, champagne cocktails 75 cents, but really great find in the archives, and one of the joys of being a nonfiction writer where you actually get these really cool artifacts from history. So here's a picture of George Remus with his mother. If you guys can see this, not sure if I'd lift it up or not, let me know. Oh yes, the screwdriver. So here's George Remus with his mother. After Imogene Holmes, Remus's mother was the most important person in his life. And I like to tell the story of the relationship in one very kind of bizarre anecdote. Remus's father was a very mean and abusive alcoholic. He was part of the reason why Remus had to quit school and go support the family. And as the story goes, Remus's father and his mother were one day at the Chicago Corner Saloon up the street from their home. They got into a fight, and Remus's mother bashed his father's head with a bottle of alcohol, and he died shortly thereafter from this wound. And Remus, wanting to protect his mother and to keep her from speaking indiscriminately to the coroner, locked his mother in an attic for 3 days until the inquest was over. Now, I try to think of this and imagine it's kind of funny to me. It's like, oh, Mom, just go in the attic. Don't worry about it. Don't question me. Just get in the attic and it's for your own good. But she went in the attic and it did save her. And Remus really supported his mother throughout her life, much to Imogene Remus's dismay. She wanted all of the money for herself. So, oh, sorry. Somebody has to lower it some. Can you see it now? It's Remus and his mother actually outside of a jail cell. Oh. So here is one of Remus went about extensive renovations on his Cincinnati mansion. Can you guys see this? Let me know. It actually, the renovations ended up costing about $12 million in today's money. Here is a picture of his parlor. Mind you, this is the second nonfiction book I have written that featured a gold piano. And in both cases, I don't know where the gold piano went. I almost wonder if the gold piano from the brothel in Sin in the Second City ended up in Remus's home 20 years later. I don't know, but I love the thought of it. Anyway, this is his parlor. Clearly, Remus was not a minimalist. It was sort of throw any style at the wall and see what would stick. Lots of garlands and vines and cherubs and naked people running around. But Remus's renovations were very important to him. He had aspirations to belong to Cincinnati's high society and, in fact, society across the country. He was new money, had grown up very poor, and he wanted to be accepted by old, long-standing, prestigious families. The Taft family, of course, William Howard Taft, the president, his sons, the Longworths, the Sintons, very, very important families in Cincinnati. And his decor was part of the reason that he really wanted to push that. Here is another picture of Remus's home. This is the solarium, one of my favorite rooms, a bit more tastefully decorated, and one that really was impressive. And again, this just goes to his point of wanting to really impress people with his home and prove that he was just as good as them. He was not just some German immigrant who lucked into his money. He was a strategic, smart businessman who deserved to associate with all the important families in Cincinnati. So to that end, to become important people in Cincinnati, George Remus and his wife decided to throw a very important New Year's Eve party in December of 1921. This is actually a print of the invitation that was issued back in December of 1921. I found this at the Delhi Historical Society right outside of Cincinnati. Really fantastic place with a lot of great artifacts. If you can't read the print, it's cameo pictures of George and Imogene Remus. It says, Mr. and Mrs. George E. Remus, our New Year's Eve greeting, dive to health, swim to wealth, float on happiness, 1921, 1922. And considering the level of debauchery that they planned for this New Year's Eve party, I don't quite understand the mom and baby, the mother and baby picture in the corner. Really not appropriate for the level of partying that was going on. But Imogene Remus designed these invitations, and whatever Imogene wanted, Imogene got. And so she is the one who designed these. They were sent out to various politicians, journalists, lawyers, various important people, socialites all across the country. And Remus and Imogene really hoped that this was their debut. This was their entree into proper society. So here's Imogene Remus on that night in her newly renovated boudoir. Here she is, very, very taken with herself. I love this picture for the detail. Aside from her gazing at herself in the mirror, which really says a lot about Imogene, it just sort of encapsulates her whole role in this book. The weird Victorian print up on the to the right of her, the fringed lamp. I just sort of love this very intimate peek into somebody's room, and which really ends up being a peek into her mind and her aspirations into bettering herself and what she really hoped to achieve by being married to George Remus. So there was a lot of talk. Can you guys see this? It's an engraved watch. It says Mr. and Mrs. George Remus, 1921. And this also was a picture discovered at the Delhi Historical Society. And there was a lot of talk about this 1921 party of Remus's. It became quite famous. Rumors about it spread around the world. In fact, it is the reason that George Remus was said to be the inspiration for Jay Gatsby and The Great Gatsby. Here is a party favor. There were diamond stickmans for the men, watches for the men like this. And for every woman, there was a brand new 1922 car given out at the party. And of course, this was decades before Oprah. It's like, you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. And every single guest got a $1,000 bill tucked beneath their plate, which would be the equivalent right now of if you guys looked under your dinner plates right now and found $14,000. I mean, that's the kind of money that we're talking about. And this was in an age that where the average annual salary for the year was $1,200. So really a staggering and disgusting display of wealth. And there were all kinds of apocryphal stories that said that George Remus and F. Scott Fitzgerald met when Fitzgerald was stationed in Louisville, Kentucky during his military service. But there's really no proof that they met. But it's definitely true that Fitzgerald knew who George Remus was when he was writing The Great Gatsby. And I think that the parallels between the two men are conspicuous. Both men were obsessed with a mysterious woman. Both men owned these lavish mansions. Both men threw these incredible parties. And both men, as well, Fitzgerald writes, Gatsby sprang from a platonic conception of himself, which I think was true of both men. They both longed to inhabit a world that didn't quite welcome them. They wanted to be somewhere where they really did not quite belong. And that was definitely true of both men. Here, I always have to have a kick-ass woman in my books. This is Mabel Walker Willenbrandt. She was the Attorney General of the United States. And when she was appointed by President Warren Harding to be the Assistant Attorney General, she was only 32 years old, 5 years out of law school, and she had never prosecuted a single case in her career. And I think that her crooked bosses in the White House, including President Harding, and in the Justice Department, were just, figured, let's put the little lady into office. She's going to be overwhelmed. She's not quite going to know what she's doing. And we're going to be able to continue our cozy relationship with bootleggers. We'll be able to keep accepting bribes and do quid pro quos and just carry on. But of course, Mabel Walker Willenbrandt took her oath of office in the fall of 1921 and just began kicking ass. And here she is. And you can imagine the rampant sexism she dealt with. There were numerous newspaper reports about her looks, all of them tying her ability at her job to her looks. Really bizarre fascination and obsession with her hands, of all things, which I write about in the book. And to make matters even worse and more difficult for Willenbrandt, she was doing this job and was almost completely deaf. You can look at her photo here. She spent about an hour each morning arranging her hair over her hearing aids to conceal the fact that she was deaf. It was just one more handicap that she didn't want her male colleagues or anybody to really know about, that they could find one more thing to decide that she was not adequate and up to the job. But you can just imagine. And she was a brilliant woman. She was quite frustrated with all the limitations that were posed upon her. And I write in the book often about her letters that she sent to her parents, really laying bare all of the frustrations with the job, her frustrations with being deaf, and also her pursuit of the bootlegger George Remus. She was the one who went after George Remus. And later on, I think it's important to say, Al Capone would not be in jail, would never have gone to jail without Mabel Walker Willenbrandt. She is the one who devised the law and who upheld the law to get Al Capone convicted of tax evasion. Without Mabel Walker Willenbrandt, Al Capone probably would never have been put in jail. So really a fascinating woman, way ahead of her time, and really just a character that I was thrilled to be involved in the story and to learn more about her, and more about her later on. Willenbrandt had quite a few obstacles in her pursuit of prohibition. By the way, here's a great irony. George Remus, who made about $40 million total during prohibition. By the way, that's not 1921 money. That is $40 million in today's money, not adjusted for inflation. He was a teetotaler who never had a drop of alcohol to drink. Meanwhile, Mabel Walker Willenbrandt, the chief enforcer of prohibition, was a lady who liked her wine. She grew up in California mostly and really liked her California Clarets. Only stopped drinking in honor of prohibition, but really enjoyed it. So kind of interesting sort of dichotomy there. Here's a great cartoon. Oh, by the way, somebody's asking me if I should write a book about her. I've said pretty much what I wanted to say about Willenbrandt. She's fascinating. In addition to all of her other fascinating qualities, she adopted a child on her own, which was very hard to do in the 1920s, being a single woman. Her boyfriend, is anybody here is aware of the Chateau Marmont, familiar with that in Los Angeles? It's actually the place where John Belushi and a bunch of other celebrities overdosed. But Mabel Walker Willenbrandt, her boyfriend, was the builder and designer and original investor and owner of the Chateau Marmont. She was an original investor and she decorated it all. She was the original decorator. And there's a whole bunch of interesting anecdotes about Willenbrandt. There is a book about her written by Dorothy Brown. It's super academic, though. It's not a narrative. There's not really much drive or suspense or anything like that. But if you're interested in more basic facts about her life, it's a very good primer on Willenbrandt. But I think I pretty much said what I want to say about her. But that said, if anybody wants to do a TV adaptation of Willenbrandt, there's plenty to say. She was also a character on Boardwalk Empire. So anyway, Willenbrandt indeed was fascinating. So the newspapers were always commenting on how difficult her job was. They were running cartoons, pretty much making fun of the job she had to do. If anybody can see this cartoon, it depicts Willenbrandt here with a broom, basically pushing against an ocean of alcohol. And the caption, which got cut off in my photos, basically just says, "Give the little lady a hand." And Willowbroad had many factors contributing to our hardship in terms of enforcing prohibition. Number one was basically the nature of the United States themselves. You know, we have these two long, craggy borders. They were incredibly porous. There was alcohol coming in from Canada. There was alcohol coming in from Mexico. And on a personal level, like Americans, if they wanted to smuggle booze, they were going to find any way to do it. Americans were going to find a way to smuggle alcohol. And, you know, I read some really funny anecdotes. There were liquor submarines that would raise and lower out of sight in New York Harbor. There was a double amputee who boasted that he could hide 36 pints in his prosthetics. There were women who claimed that they, you know, the chicken cutlets, the rubber breasts that women use to make themselves appear a little bit more well endowed, they would hide alcohol in those things. And I have a couple other pictures here that show my favorite ways that people smuggled alcohol. Here is one. It's called, here at first glance, this woman is holding a book. And the book is titled The Four Swallows, and it's written by J.B. Corn, which is a very not subtle reference to John Barleycorn. But it's not really a book. If you flip open the top, you see that it's a flask. Can you guys see this picture? You flip open the top and you see it's a flask. There's 4 vials, hence the 4 swallows, that can basically hold any amount of alcohol that you choose. It's 4 generous pours. This is a very popular invention during Prohibition, and it was the work of a Brooklyn-based inventor named John Nuttry. Before Prohibition, he made a name for himself designing little personal coin banks that look like books. But after Prohibition, he decided to make a living designing flasks that could be masquerade as books. And he patented this in about February of 1921, and it was a very popular invention. So, which brings me to what somebody's going to win tonight. Here, you know, at first glance, this woman is in a cafe enjoying her cup of coffee. But what is she doing with this cane? She's dumping a bunch of alcohol in it. And these were also very popular. Clearly, she's very pleased with herself. You just unscrew the top, and there's a vial inside where you can pour your booze out of. And one random lucky player today who came tonight is going to win a replication of this flask. I have one myself. It's pretty cool. And I can't wait till the bars open up again where I can use this. And it's a great conversation piece. So good luck to everybody tonight. Somebody is going to win a reproduction flask and a copy of The Ghost of Eden Park. So here's another way that people smuggled booze. If you could see this photo, I like to call this one, "My, what a big flask you have." But it was actually called the bootlegger's life preserver. And this is really fascinating to me because it was very popular among women. And now women knew that they could basically hide booze in every part of their body. And the reason was because Prohibition agents, if you could believe this, you know, it's so opposite from today, but the Prohibition agents were either too nervous or too polite to search women. And in some states, it was actually illegal to search women at all. So women knew this. They took full advantage of it. Hence, they shoved booze in their bloomers and their garter belts, in their false rubber breasts, their chicken cutlets, if you will. And, of course, in the bootlegger's life preserver here, which could easily be hidden by a big fur coat. And it was funny. There were a lot of anecdotes about women getting caught by Prohibition agents, and they basically said, "Search me. I dare you. You're not allowed. You know, you're out of luck. I might have 10 gallons of booze on me, and there's nothing you can do about it." So I really love that too. Just sort of the inventive ways that women especially realized they could get alcohol wherever they wanted to get it. So these were another favorite part of my research. These are called cow shoes, if you can see them. They did not hold any alcohol, but they were indispensable to bootleggers who created moonshine in forests or meadows. As you can see, the hooves are made carved from wood, and they were made to the heels were carved from wood and made to resemble hooves. So they literally covered your tracks if you were fleeing a Prohibition agent on foot. you'd be running through the meadow or the forest, and the prohibition agent would simply just find a bunch of cow tracks. They wouldn't have any idea where you were, but they just found a bunch of animal tracks, and they were quite confused by this. I love these. I wish they would make a fashion comeback. I would wear them everywhere. I hope they come back on eBay. I'm actually thinking of getting a pair made. So I thought they were pretty fabulous. They were really popular in the South. Oh, somebody's Barbara Katz is commenting. I saw a video at a liquor store of someone smuggling out huge bottles and pockets sewn into their pants. Like, so people are still finding ways. I love it. I think any way that people can smuggle booze is a good thing. So especially in these times of quarantine. So here is a key component of the love triangle that develops between Imogene Remus and George Remus. This is Prohibition agent Franklin Dodge. Now, I did not include a picture of him in the book, and I'll tell you why. I had if anybody here is familiar with Erik Larson, the writer Erik Larson, he's a dear friend of mine. And we had a conversation one time about whether or not to include photos in nonfiction books. And his argument, he said, you know, I'm dealing with these romantic Victorian letters, these florid love languages, you know, these florid words of love and admiration, and you're so beautiful and you're so gorgeous. And you really expect to look up these people's pictures and be incredibly awed by their beauty. And then usually you look up the picture and they're like, and that was Erik doing that. It was actually quite funny. And I felt this way when I saw Franklin Dodge. He is the source of so much angst in George and Imogene's marriage. Just to give you some background about Franklin Dodge, Mabel Walker Willenbrandt, our assistant attorney general, decided that Franklin Dodge was a very trustworthy and dependable and smart and talented prohibition agent. He came from a very illustrious family in Michigan, from a very important political family, well-connected people. And he was the kind of guy who was able and willing to go undercover. He was willing to sort of try to get information for Willenbrandt's cases through nefarious means. She really admired his ingenuity and thought he was dependable. She actually called him her ace of detectives. And so it was very surprising for her when rumors started to circulate that Franklin Dodge maybe wasn't quite as trustworthy as Willenbrandt thought. He was actually having an affair with Imogene Remus, the wife of George Remus, who Franklin Dodge actually helped put in jail. So there develops a very salacious love triangle, and Franklin Dodge was a key component of that. Oh, by the way, if you like Erik Larson's books, he blurbed my book. Very kind of him. He had some really nice things to say, and which was a very happy day for me. Here was kind of a funny thing I ran across in my research. Society's freaking out about middle-aged flappers. Basically, women who were old enough to know better. And, you know, there was big talk about the flapper menace. Oh, my God, middle-aged flappers. They're destroying the country. They're the greatest threat since the plague. I mean, the language that was spouted about middle-aged flappers was quite amusing to me and astounding. And basically what it was, at least in part, was a backlash against women asserting themselves in the 1920s. You know, many men were not happy by the fact that their mothers, their wives, their girlfriends, their sisters suddenly had the right to vote. And this was part of the backlash against that. And who do they aim for but middle-aged women who were old enough to know better? The New York Times defined middle-aged flappers as, quote, a woman who deposited her husband at home and goes out in search of culture. Imogene Remus was certainly a middle-aged flapper. She deposited Remus in jail and went out in search of culture. Franklin Dodge became her culture. And so it was kind of an interesting theme to me in the book, the backlash against women and the sort of scrutiny of women's changing roles. As for younger flappers, they developed a flapper dictionary. You can't really see this. They had a flapper magazine. It got cut off at the top. But it was young flappers developed their own magazine. And the tagline was not for old fogies. And they actually had a fabulous definition of flapper. It was somebody with a jitney body and a limousine mind, which I think needs to make a comeback. And they had all this great 1920s flapper slang. I will read a couple of my favorite bits for you. Let's see. A boob tickler was a girl who entertains followers out of town guests. Let's see. A bash hound was a rustic and others outside of the flapper pale. A canceled stamp was a wallflower. A cake basket was a limousine. Let's see. And applesauce was flattery and bunk. They had a bunch of these, but very, flappers in general were painted as dangerous to society. There were colleges who had all these male groups that formed in opposition to flappers. They were protesting girls who smoked, who were flopping galoshes, and who gathered in places that were heretofore restricted to men. So it was kind of a moral panic. Here is another example of that. Here was one of my favorite cartoons that I found during my research about flappers. And it was basically coloring flappers as sexual predators. If you can't read the middle text here, it says, unsuspecting boys were forced to endure such unseemly exercises as cheek dancing. Oh, God forbid cheek dancing. It's so scandalous and dangerous. Those boys aren't going to know what hit them. But this was one of the amusing cartoons and sort of the hyperbole surrounding flappers, which basically were women who decided that the old Victorian restraints no longer applied to them. They were not going to adhere to the old ways, and they were going to go out in search of something new and more brash and more freedom for themselves. And this was the kind of backlash they faced. So you guys might recognize this picture if you can see it. This is J. Edgar Hoover. I kind of love his appearance in this book. And nobody really knows this, but let's see, Secret Society. I will send out a list of the flapper slang later on for anybody who's interested. Here's a picture of J. Edgar Hoover. By the way, he would not have been promoted to the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation without Mabel Walker Willenbrandt. She is the one who recommended him. She put in a word from him, and without her recommendation, probably Hoover would have just ended up in the dustbin of FBI agents, like many others who are nameless and not remembered today. But here he is in 1924. He was only 29 years old. Willenbrandt recommended him for the top post, and he is named the director of the Bureau of Investigation, which was the precursor to the FBI. And, Hoover, say what you want about him, but he did want an honest force of prohibition agents. All his faults, and he had many, he was determined to have prohibition agents who did not take bribes, who did not enter in quid pro quos, people who were actually honest and really interested in enforcing prohibition. That was very important to him. So Hoover, along with everybody else, gets wind of the fact that Franklin Dodge is actually not as honorable as Mabel Walker Willenbrandt thinks he is. She thinks that, he has heard things about him. He's corrupt. He's been taking money. He's in cahoots with George Remus's wife. He's actually having an affair with George Remus's wife. And Hoover decides to investigate this. And he actually sends one of his own agents to spy on Franklin Dodge. It's sort of a case of spy versus spy. And what does Hoover's agent find? He finds out that Imogene Remus and Dodge are stealing Remus's whiskey certificates. They are taking items from his mansion. And in one scene that was incredible for me to write, you never get to write these scenes in nonfiction because the source material is never there. Hoover's agent actually catches Dodge literally with his pants down. Now, I cannot emphasize enough how much fun it was to write a scene in nonfiction where somebody is caught with their pants down. That stuff only happens in fiction. But it happened in Lugosi of Eden Park, which is one of the many reasons I think it's stranger than fiction. But to cut to the chase here, in this book, J. Edgar Hoover is one of the good guys. You really can't see that about J. Edgar Hoover in any other book, I think, except for this one. So here is George Remus in prison. Now, don't let his morose expression fool you. Can you all see this? George Remus in prison had quite a cushy arrangement. He had multiple rooms. He had several rooms in his suite. He had his own maid. He had a gourmet chef who would prepare meals for him every night. He had these meals on a long mahogany table laid out with linen. He even had his own stash of alcohol. When reporters would visit him, he would actually ask them what they might like to drink. And this was just, I think, one of the reasons that this book and that George Remus's story could only have happened in the 1920s. I can't imagine any other era where somebody, a bootlegger no less, would be in a prison cell with his own stash of alcohol to offer to reporters. Despite all of this, George Remus was miserable in prison. He was a control freak. And he knew that in prison, he could not control anything. He couldn't control his liquor empire. He couldn't control his money. And most of all, he could not control his wife, Imogene. He had heard rumors that she was cavorting with Agent Franklin Dodge. He knew that his wife was having an affair. And there was really nothing that he could do about it. And so Remus being in prison and the source of this stress and anxiety, the driving plot of the book, and eventually ends in murder. I won't say whose murder because, and I'll get to that in the next picture. This is a man named Harry Truesdale. Now, Harry Truesdale is a hired hitman. He was hired by Imogene Remus and Franklin Dodge to kill George Remus. And let me just say that there are so many twists and turns that at the end of this story, Harry Truesdale, this hired hitman, this professional killer, was so terrified of both George and Imogene Remus that he thought either one of them might kill him. He was worried for his own life. So it just gives you, goes to show how crazy the story gets, that the actual hitman is in fear of his life. So here's the final slide I'm going to show you tonight. This is a picture of George Remus's grave. He was buried in Falmouth, Kentucky. And there is a story, you can see his tombstones. There were angels where the wings were taken off. The wings should be in these two spots, if you can see this picture. And as the story goes, somebody wrote a letter saying that George Remus, having lived the life that he lived, did not deserve to have angel wings on his tombstone. So the very next day, his wife took out a hammer, knocked off the angel wings, and this is how his tombstone actually appears today. And I usually end my talk by saying that, you know, people who do what I do, who write narrative nonfiction, we often lament that we're beholden to the historical record. You know, we're not allowed to make up dialogue. We're not allowed to make up events. We're not allowed to make up people or characters or anecdotes or anything. Not even the weather. We can't make up anything. And it's often a hindrance because we have to adhere so closely to the historical record. And I like to say that the Ghost of Eden Park represents the very first time that the dead people did exactly what I wanted them to do. So it was a lot of fun to write this book. It's truly stranger than fiction. And I will happily take any questions. Oh no. So people are asking what happens at the end of the story. I can't tell. I don't want to tell what happens. If anybody wants to read the book, I don't want to spoil who gets killed. But they are both equally murderous. Eileen, can you see me now? I hope that the storm unfroze. It is a little bit rainy here, so I don't know. But if anybody has any questions about research or about the characters or about anything related to the 1920s, I often love when people come to my talks and they have stories about their own ancestors who maybe were alive at this time and had some connections to bootlegging. I often like to use those in my next talks. So if anybody has any questions, and if you don't ask them here, if you share this video or tell anybody about it, I'm always happy to answer questions on email or on Facebook. Let's see, anxious to read. Did I have to research the weather? I actually did have to research the weather. In the prologue, which actually was one of my favorite scenes to write because I set up them. It's kind of Chekhov's gun. A gun goes off at the end of the prologue and you don't know who shot the gun, which you know, as you read the story, you do hear who shot the gun, but it's kind of Chekhov's gun set up. And I did have to research the weather. In Cincinnati in October when the murder took place, they were experiencing Indian summer, and I had to go back through and find the weather report for that day, which I cite in the book. All the weather is cited. Everything is cited. I think I have 80 pages of endnotes and citations. So if you pick up the book and are daunted by the thickness of it, realize that 80 pages of that is actually endnotes and citations and not book. So it's probably shorter than you think. It's actually fewer than 100,000 words. Eileen, I'm so sorry if you have the frozen screen. I'm always happy to, I'll refresh my screen. Let's see. I'll reload